President Trump is moving forward with plans to tie immigration policy with the economy. The U.S. will impose a 5% tariff on Mexican imports starting June 10th. Mr. Trump says it's an effort to stop the flow of people crossing the border, and he's threatening to go further. The levy has the potential to reach 25%. It will increase each month unless Mexico takes action. In a tweet Sunday, President Trump called Mexico a, quote, abuser of the United States, claiming it has been this way for decades. But members of his own party are warning against the policy. In a statement this week, Republican Senator and Finance Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley said, quote, trade policy and border security are separate issues, adding, this is a misuse of presidential tariff authority. Tariffs and the situation at the border got a lot of attention on the Sunday morning talk shows. Here's some of what you may have missed.
It's real. We had a group of 1,000 people, not in different times, one group of 1,000 people walk across the border just in the last couple of days. 2,500 people are coming over every single day as opposed to 700 just 2 years ago. So the numbers are huge. The situation is real, and the president is deadly serious about fixing the problem.
And my sympathy is with the families who've had to flee the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, who are met with the greatest cruelty and inhumanity in this country's history. We have the capacity to be able to take care of those families. I'm proposing a family case management program.
Can the city of El Paso keep handling more and more migrants coming over the border?
This country, the United States of America, absolutely can do this.
I really worry about us negotiating trade deals with other countries and whether those countries will wonder, well, if we make concessions and trade hard and we reach a deal, will America stick to it? Now, having said all of that, I don't think the president's going to impose these tariffs. My experience with the president is he's a very smart man. I wouldn't call him risk averse. He's been known to play with fire, but not live hand grenades. And if he slaps a 25% tariff on Mexico, it's going to tank the American economy.
Joining us now is Susan Page. Susan is the Washington bureau chief for USA Today. So, Susan, the president is threatening to increase these tariffs unless Mexico takes action. Do we know specifically what Mr. Trump is looking for Mexico to do, and how would such progress on Mexico's part be measured?
You know, that was one of the big questions surrounding the president's threat of these tariffs. He said they had to end illegal migration across the border, which is, of course, basically an impossible task. And he didn't lay out metrics for how Mexico could achieve this. He also didn't discuss in a serious way why you conflate these two issues, the issue of border security with the issue of tariffs. Now, we do have a high-level Mexican delegation coming to Washington to meet with administration officials this week. They'll be here on Wednesday. And the Mexican president yesterday spoke in an optimistic way that they'll be able to reach a deal, because there is a sense that this is a threat that the president will not, in the end, actually make. You saw Senator Kennedy of Louisiana in the clip you just showed saying that that would be like playing with live hand grenades. And he, for one, and Senator Kennedy, of course, is a Republican, does not think that is something that the president will actually follow through with.
Well, as we heard before, the president is facing that criticism from Republicans on Capitol Hill, also in part because of that pending North American trade deal in the works to replace NAFTA. So how can we expect those negotiations to be impacted, even if the president doesn't follow through here, but just the fact that there is this rhetoric coming, how might that actually affect those negotiations?
You know, there was actually some thought that this might be something that could get approved by the Congress, this new NAFTA or NAFTA 2.0. But I think the sense is that is that prospect, which wasn't that bright, but maybe was there, has been undermined by this threat to Mexico on tariffs. The administration did something else in this past week, which was to start a clock ticking on the new NAFTA talks, to the annoyance of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And I'll tell you, I remember back in 2008, when President George W. Bush, another Republican president, trying to get a trade deal through the Congress, that one was with Colombia, did a similar maneuver with Nancy Pelosi, who was then Speaker for the first time, and that deal did not get approved. So I think the optimism, or the shaded optimism that was around that deal, has now gone away. I think very few people now think it's going to be approved.
Annoyance because Nancy Pelosi felt she needed her own timetable and didn't want that added pressure.
And she said that they were already engaged in serious talks with the administration and with the Mexicans about trying to have some protections in the agreement that would make it acceptable to Democrats. This was not one of those cases where everybody was at loggerheads. She said progress was being made, and then the administration took this step.
Well, let's talk about China and keeping with trade here. China released a government policy paper Sunday. It blamed the U.S. for a stalled deal, but also signaled a willingness to return to talks. Do we know what the White House would need in order to return to the negotiating table?
You know, we don't know. And the administration on this issue, as with others, is not very explicit about what exactly they're talking about. The president talks very tough on trade. He has been a critic of international trade agreements and being taken advantage of, in his view, by our trading partners from the very beginning of his presidential campaign. So this is a consistent theme he has struck. But he also, I think, his people around him, aides around him, recognize the risks of failing to go back to the table and talk with China, because the biggest asset the president has in this country is the strong economy. That's really kept him, that's been an underpinning of his presidency. It's helped him keep his support up here. It's given him flexibility on other issues. And some of those close to him worry that a trade war that involves Mexico and China and others will cripple the U.S. economy or undermine it, hurt it in a way that might threaten this long recovery.
Well, from one negotiation to another, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Sunday the Trump administration is willing to talk to Iran with, quote, no preconditions. So, Susan, put this into context for us. What has been this administration's stance towards Iran? And do these recent comments signal a possible shift?
Well, you know, we had a point where it looked like we were going to go to war with Iran. You know, we've dispatched some hundreds of more of U.S. troops to the region, citing the threat from Iran. And of course, the United States, the Trump administration, pulled out of that Iran nuclear deal. So the talk was very tough. The talk was very tough coming from John Bolton, the president's national security advisor. So when we heard from the Secretary of State that the United States was willing to go without preconditions into talks with Iran, that's seen as a change of tone, as a signal that the United States does not want to go to war with Iran. They're willing to talk.
Well, finally, the president will be overseas this week. He's arriving in the United Kingdom Monday morning. Mr. Trump is backing Boris Johnson, a pro-Brexit politician, to replace outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May. Do we know what's behind the president's endorsement?
Well, the president, I think, likes Boris Johnson's style. He's also a kind of a bold, not always politically correct kind of politician along the lines of the president himself. President Trump spoke favorably of Boris Johnson the last time he was there in a way that was created some problems for Theresa May. There's some question about whether he might meet with Boris Johnson while he's in London, and that could reflect a kind of effort for the U.S. president getting involved in the political situation in Great Britain, which is now just getting sorted out, still kind of a mess about who will succeed Theresa May.
All right, Susan Page in Washington. Always great to have you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.